SS16 twin. It has an opposed twin 16 horsepower Onan, and we've got a slight problem with it. There is gasoline leaking into the crankcase. It's not real bad, but I want to fix this before it causes any problems. So I'll show you what it's doing here. If we pop the hood here, you guys will see what I'm talking about, and as long as I pull out the dipstick too. So I generally check the oil every time I run this tractor, because you know it's an older motor and it's just I wouldn't say it's not worn out, but it's old. It's, you know, it needs a little bit of attention and care and whatnot. So I'm gonna pull the dipstick out here and I'll show you the problem. So the first time that I pull this dipstick out, hope you can see how runny the oil is. I guess it's not that bad. It's also about 30-some degrees. But look, the oil right now is up probably 2 times what it should be. So I don't know how the heck this oil does this or why it does this, but the full mark is right there. And we are the whole way up to right there. So I don't know how else to fix this. So we are at the O in naught. So let me see if I can get this in focus here. So we're supposed to be full right there. The first time I pull out the dipstick, it is right there. So we're like 3 times what it should be. And then if I put this back in again, click it in, and then pull it back out again, we are at the second L in full. Now mind you, I know for sure that I filled this up to the in between the hash marks. It was slightly below the full before. So I don't know what else to do other than rebuild the carburetor, which I bought a fuel pump kit and it came with a needle and seat. And actually, let me show you this. This is the carb kit I bought. Actually, is that... Wow, I might have an oil leak. Oh, that's interesting. There's a bunch of oil right there. I don't know what would be causing that. But anyways, this right here is the kit I was able to buy. If I can get my camera to focus here. KIPA, carburetor, carb rebuild, 1 pump, part number K7 23142-057. So it must be a Chinese company or something that's making this, because I can see some Chinese symbols there. I'm assuming that's what those are, but for whatever reason on this tractor there is a fuel pump over here. So this is not factory, and the fuel pump, this little square piece right here, that is the fuel pump on the carburetor. So I don't know why they had to add that one in when they already had one on the carburetor. So I'm going to rebuild that and take out this one, and then I'll probably figure out why they had to add that one. So let's get started here rebuilding this. I have rebuilt carbs before. I've never rebuilt one of these, so let's get started. Here I'm just taking off the air filter and the cover and stuff. So to get access to the top of the carburetor, there are 3 Phillips head screws, and I think you need a number 2 Phillips to undo those. And then there's also like I think it's a crankcase breather tube that's in where the air filter is, and you just take a screwdriver and just kind of work that out. I have to buy a new one of those. That tube is very difficult to get in and out of the shroud for the air filter, and it was broken off at the bottom that hooks into the motor. So I already have the top of the carburetor off, and there is the float, the needle, and the seat in that top piece, plus a gasket. So I was able to replace the gasket, the needle, as well as the seat. I am still using the old float, and what you want to do, they're supposed to be in between the float and the body, or that top piece that I removed off the carburetor. There's supposed to be an 1/8 of an inch gap in between those two. When you flip the top piece, you know, it's laid down with the float down, so the float hangs down. When you flip that up, so flip it upside down, there should be an 1/8 of an inch gap at the end of the float opposite where it's hinged at. Just so you guys know, that's what people have said online, and I'm just kind of repeating what they said. So I am kind of amazed at how dirty this carburetor was. I'm starting to wonder if this tractor had sat for a while. There's all sorts of gunk and stuff inside the bowl here and inside of the side cover where the fuel pump should be. So there was not a fuel pump on this carburetor. Apparently they made 2 different kinds of carburetors for these motors. The generator ones, if I remember correctly, this motor was on a lot of different pieces of equipment and stuff. The generator ones, and possibly even some tractors and whatnot, they were a gravity feed system, so they did not need a fuel pump. This tractor is not a gravity feed, so it needs a fuel pump because the fuel pump is underneath the operator seat in the back of the tractor. So I'm just kind of taking things apart here and figuring out how the gaskets and stuff should go. I am kind of disappointed in doing this. You know, I've got the manual out here. I pretty much rebuilt everything to the best that I could, and pretty much exactly how the manual said to do it, and I was unable to get this fuel pump to work on the carburetor and for this motor. So I'm pretty disappointed in that. This was kind of just I burned up probably $80 to do all this, and you know, I'm doing this exactly how the manual says. I think I have the original manual, which is right here on the left side of the screen, and I mean, it's complete as far as I know, and it shows the carburetor in an exploded view of it and everything. So I am putting this thing back together the way that they said to put it back together. And I wanted to mention to anyone that doesn't know about getting the seat out of this top piece where the float is, what I did was, you can use a flathead screwdriver, but generally most flathead screwdrivers do not go, they're not big enough to fit the whole way across that seat, and if you remove this seat, it is pretty important that you get a piece of metal or something that goes the whole way across that to turn on it, to unscrew it and whatnot. This seat was incredibly tight. You would not believe how tight it was in the top part of the carburetor. So to remedy that, I didn't have a screwdriver that would fit. What I used was a spade bit. I think it was a 1/2 inch. A 1/2 inch spade bit that I cut the end off. So I cut the point off, so it's just a flat piece on the bottom. And I basically just made a huge 1/4 inch drive screwdriver. So now I can chuck that up into the impact, and I was able to just clamp the top piece of that carburetor into the vise that I have, and put the spade bit in the impact and take it out that way with the impact. I do not think I would have been able to take that seat out without the impact. Just an FYI for you guys that are watching this video and doing this. So I noticed another couple of problems with this. I had, like I said, that hose that I needed to buy for the crankcase breather. I also had to buy another, I need to buy another gasket in between the air filter and the carburetor itself. And then the last problem, and I think this is why this fuel pump that I'm working on here didn't work, is so I hooked up both fuel pumps together, and with the second one hooked up, the little auxiliary one, not the one that's on the carburetor, with the auxiliary one hooked up, I was able to squeeze gas out of the fuel pump on the carburetor. So something was definitely not sealing good at all and whatsoever in the fuel pump on the carburetor. So I'm pretty sure that's why it wasn't working. But like I said, I have put this thing exactly back together as the manual says. So, you know, everything is correct, and it still didn't work. So this was pretty, I've got to say, I worked on this for way longer than what I should have. I worked on this thing for probably a couple days, and, you know, on and off every day. And I finally just said, you know what, this isn't going to work. I'm going to cut my losses and move on. So I did eventually put that auxiliary fuel pump back onto this thing. I had to kind of figure out where the lines and stuff go in order to get this motor to run again. But I also bought a cover plate. See, since the two different carburetors that Onan made, I think Onan made these, I'm not real sure. Actually, there's a guy on YouTube, and he bought his parts. The little baggie said Cummins on it, so I guess these Onan motors or carburetors and stuff were made by Cummins. I'm not really sure, but the rebuild kit said it was made by Zenith, or like Zenith carburetors, or Marvel Chevrolet. I don't really know. But anyways, I bought an extra side plate for the fuel pump, and that ended up not... or the old one didn't work with the fuel pump, but the new one should have, so I have a brand new cover plate that I don't really need. I think I have pretty much everything back together on this tractor. I'm not entirely sure that I did this right. I followed everything that the manual had to say in the parts diagram and stuff, so I had an extra spring. I did not mess with any of the other jets. All I did was the needle, the seat, and gaskets, and the fuel pump. This tractor had an auxiliary fuel pump that was elsewhere in the fuel system, and I got rid of that and put it back to the stock one. So, and I also adjusted, they say when you flip the top of the carburetor, the piece that comes off, you flip that over and the float will come with it. You're supposed to, when you have it flipped over, there's supposed to be 1/8 of an inch of a gap in that. So it was bigger than what it was, what it should be, so I put it back to 1/8 of an inch. So I'm not entirely sure that this thing's going to work. My guess is that it's not. I'm not a professional at this, and if anyone has any suggestions on about doing this, I think I have all the gaskets and stuff where they should be. I still have to order a part or two, but I don't know, we'll see. And this is also going to be a cold start, so this isn't going to be very easy on this motor. So I have the air filter and stuff in, and I don't know, I don't think it's going to start, but we'll see. So clutch in, pull the choke out. just give her a little bit of starting fluid. I've done pretty much all I can think of to get this tractor to work, and this old fuel pump in here to just work, and I cannot get this thing to function. Now, this is the fuel pump. The carburetor is fine. I've tried pressurizing that tank to send fuel up to here so it'll go through the motor, and it's just not working. So as much as I don't like to do this, I went out and bought 10 feet of 1/4-inch fuel line. I also bought a fuel shutoff valve. So to stop this tractor from leaking gas into the crankcase, I'm going to put the fuel filter, or the fuel pump, put that old fuel pump back on because it worked okay. It's just I wanted to use the original one. So I'm going to do that, probably put that here, and then probably have a shutoff valve right here. And hopefully this will be right outside the tractor. And I can just shut off the fuel as needed. You know, basically whenever I'm done running it, just shut the fuel off, and then hopefully that'll pretty much stop any issues with the gas leaking into the crankcase like it was. And I mean, this oil doesn't look the greatest. It's still pretty runny, and there's actually moisture. There's little pieces of snow on there. Ice, oh my gosh, look at that. So I'm going to pull this back off again and put that old fuel pump back on, and basically kind of put everything back to the way it was, take off the one that I had, and I bought a new plate. I don't know if you guys can see it in there, but it's this plate way back in there. That was like 34 bucks, and then the fuel pump kit was like another 20, and it's pretty easy to drop a 50 or 100 bucks on this thing. So I've about had enough of dealing with this motor for now. I've worked on this for a couple days now, and there's lots of videos and stuff on YouTube for these tractors. They've been, this motor and this carburetor mainly has been pretty temperamental, and I've just had enough. So we're just going to put on the original fuel pump with a shutoff. So basically when the motor is off, I can just turn the fuel off, or I might do it, turn the fuel off and then kill the motor. So, well, let's get started on that. So the plan is here. I'm going to take off the new fuel pump that I put on the carburetor, put the old cover plate back on. It's the plate that the fuel line goes into on the carburetor itself. And then I'm going to mount the new, well, not new, but the fuel pump that works on this thing, just up on the side there by the battery. And it took me a while to figure out where these hoses and stuff should go and how long to make them, and probably took me a lot more time than what it should have, but that's the way things go, I guess. But I'm just measuring out this fuel line. I generally how I do this is I'll hook up the one side to wherever it needs to go, and then kind of lay the fuel line where I'd like it to go and line it up with the other side of where it's going to go on, such as the fuel pump over here, and that kind of gets me pretty much where it should go. Now there were 3 lines going into the fuel pump and 2 into the carburetor, so the 3rd line with the fuel filter is the gasoline coming from the tank, and then the other 2, the line that is labeled P is the line that goes into the crankcase so that it can pull a vacuum, I think it is, or it's a pressure line or something, and that goes into the crankcase, and then the other line goes into the carburetor itself, and then it should hopefully work just fine. Fortunately, I think I got this correct the first time. I kind of lucked out. But I used some self-tapping screws to put this pump to at least drill the holes with on this piece of metal here. The problem is the self-tapping screws were not long enough, so I just ended up using some bolts and whatnot to bolt this. I guess it's a vacuum pump. I guess that's what they call it. I'm not entirely sure. But it seems to work good, so I had also wondered, my brother brought up a good point, that maybe this pump is overwhelming the needle and seat in the carburetor. So I would have to add in a restrictor valve in addition to the other valve that I added, which I didn't get these lines and stuff quite right, so it's just the way things go, I guess. But I did have the motor running there, and it still seems to run good. The other parts of the carburetor did not need rebuilt, like the base gasket in between the intake and the carburetor itself, as well as the other gaskets that were in it, and the other needles in it did not need. They were fine, so I didn't even mess with them because the motor ran fine before. The problem was in the needle, seat, and the float assembly there. But like I said, I'm just trying to get this fuel valve on the outside of the hood so that as whenever I walk up to this tractor to use it for, whenever I need to use it, what I'll do is I'll turn that fuel valve on, and then I will just turn the tractor on, and then the fuel pump does the rest, and seems to work fine as I'm using it. But I did check the oil today in it, and it's a hair below full, which is about where I want it. I might add a little bit of Lucas in just to kind of bring it back up to full again. So it seems to have corrected the problem, and I definitely think from whenever it would sit, any extra fuel and stuff would just drain itself from the carburetor into the intake and then back into the engine again. And that is really not healthy whatsoever for the engine. I think I have pretty much everything put back together. I decided to put the fuel shut off out here, so when the hood is closed, all I have to do is reach over here, turn the fuel from off to on, mounted the external fuel pump, still have the fuel filter on, and I think everything is pretty much buttoned up and ready to go in this thing. I'm not real thrilled how this thing went back together. Like I said, a lot of people have said that these Onan motors with the fuel pump, the carburetor can be pretty finicky with them, and I'm definitely seeing that. So I spent almost $100, probably 60, 70, 80 bucks on trying to get this old fuel pump going. So I am done sinking any more money into the carburetor on this thing. It's obviously not going to work. I'm not sure why. Although I did notice, I was wondering if the gaskets and stuff were not sealing, because with the old fuel pump on there, on the carb, and then I had this one pumping, I had this thing running, gas was spewing out in between the gaskets on the carburetor, so that is my guess for possibly why it was not working. But I have pretty much everything back together. So basically, whenever I turn off this tractor, what I'll do, before I hit the key, I'll probably come over here, turn the fuel off, and then maybe let it run for another 10 seconds or something, and just not run it out of fuel, but just run it enough that any extra fuel that's in this line is less likely to go back into the carburetor. So, and I also replaced the needle seat, and there's supposed to be a spring or something in there. There was no spring in the kit that I got. So, well, I guess without further ado, let's fire this thing up and you guys can see it run. Like I said, I am pretty disappointed that this didn't really work out, but you know, it is what it is, right? So we're going to turn the fuel on, and yes, I know I'm going to get the comments saying that, oh, there's probably not any fuel in the tank. And yes, there is. Trust me, there's plenty of fuel in this thing. So the fuel valve is in line with the line, so it's on.